What's the craziest meltdown someone has had at work? Story 1. I used to work in a kitchen in an old folks' home. I had a manager named Edward who was a know-it-all piece of uninformed crap. I had a coworker named E who had a very serious medical condition and required a certain medication at certain points of the day. Edward didn't like E or the fact that she needed to keep her medication on her person. One day he forgot her medication and begged to run home and retrieve it. Edward smugly denied her and told her to finish work, so she tried and ended up briefly collapsing. She was okay, but very weak and disoriented. Edward grabbed her by the arm, escorted her to her car, handed her the keys, and told her to leave. Then he left to go tell anyone that would listen that E was on drugs and he smelled booze on her. He was in the parking lot and called her mom to take her to the hospital. He was only 20 and very scared. He was discharged that night after some fluids and came back the next day upon hearing what Edward told everyone about her. She stormed into HR screaming for them to bring Edward's butt in the office immediately. As soon as he was called in, she whipped her name tag at him. I obviously lingered close by like a nosy bee. She was screaming at the top of her lungs that Edward denied her to go home to get her medication that was on file and HR was very aware of, and how freaking dare he accuse her of being a drug addict. And if he really believed she was under the influence of something, how stupid was he to put her in a car on the company's property, leaving them liable for her damages? At this point, much noise can be heard, as all three of them are screaming full force at one another. She threatened legal action and stormed out. Well, she did take legal action, for a ton of crap including putting a clearly ill person behind the wheel. Not too long after this, I also quit, and a few months later, Edward was no longer employed by the kitchen, but rather was working as a deli boy in the local grocery store. I don't know what happened with E's lawsuit, but I hope that place and Edward got everything they deserved. Also, honorable mention to R, the maintenance man that threatened to shoot my old boss in the face for being such a dongless weasel. To anyone who gets any sort of supervisory or managerial role, I know you want to seem in charge and all that, but if you become the type of manager who denies employees basic things and tries to control them, I just want you to know, you might be a dongless weasel. Story 2. Not saw, but had. I was about 7 months pregnant and had just recently been moved to a different office. The new office had all kinds of rules no one informed me or my fellow coworkers of, and I kept getting hauled into the office to be told off for things I didn't even know I was doing wrong. Now, if it was just friendly reminders, I wouldn't have had a problem, but my supervisor was this high and mighty bee that kept belittling me and trying to make me feel bad, and kept commenting on how I wasn't fit for this job. Keeping in mind, I had been doing it for over 2 years at this point with no problems. Time before the blowout, she said I'd be written up next time she has to talk to me. So I'm working away, trying my damnedest not to frick up, but I really don't want to be written up, and I honestly couldn't handle any more stress. Well, I get called into the office with her, and our union rep and I see a notice on her desk. I lost it. I started yelling and crying and listing off all the horrible things she's been putting me through and how it was unfair for her to treat me like this, and how half the crap I wasn't even told about. I think I actually started having a panic attack during the whole ordeal and told the union rep some of the comments she made over the past few months. It felt good to get it out and finally put her in her place. She was so taken aback that I stood up for myself, read freaked the frick out, that I ended up being sent home early, they were worried about my baby's well-being. The notice turned out to just be a list of expectations only 6 months late, which I had to read and sign, but she left me alone after that. Story 3. One day when I listened to a call, this woman had a very slow meltdown over the phone that ended in her in sobs. The caller didn't hear something she said and asked her to repeat herself. My coworker repeated herself in a friendly, irritated tone and then says, "Why does everyone want me to be mean today?" To the caller. The girl on the other line is obviously confused and asked her if she was having a bad day and if she needed to speak to someone else. She then says no and that she will be the one helping her. It gets worse. She bombs this call, like totally does not do her job correctly and makes this painfully obvious to the point where the caller says that she will help her figure this out together and to not cry anymore. This was a help desk type job for other employees. Well, they don't, and she ends up crying, and you can hear her snap at someone else in the office, which obviously has the caller insanely concerned. My coworker goes on a rant about how people are hateful and that she hates this job and it's too hard for her to do. It wasn't really easy for everyone. And tells the caller she's going to be transferred. We had to call back and issue the caller an apology. She responded by asking if my coworker was going to be okay. We said yes, but no, she wasn't. The office manager ended up having to fire her for another call where she was complaining and abusing the caller. Before she was fired, she was told she could use her benefits to speak to a counselor because she kept having outbursts at work and everyone was getting worried about her. She said this wasn't the first time she heard that and didn't know why people kept saying it. I still think about her. This was 2 years ago and wonder if she ever got help. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed the way your boss and that person on the call handled all that. It sounds like this employee was having a really tough time and at least you all tried to help, even if it didn't quite pan out. Story 4. During grad school, a professor in my department had a doctoral student who'd been there a few years, had passed candidacy exams, and was writing up the dissertation. I still don't know what truly caused the argument, but they ended up having a shouting match in the hallway in our academic building one day. Allegedly, student wanted to publish results, and professor said no because they actually corrected a previously published theory he had first authored. Major fireworks. Student ends up switching to a new lab, refuses to let professor have the lab/research notes, and wrote up his dissertation using the original data funded by the original professor under a different professor. A big deal, again. Huge drama. That professor submitted his tenure packet 1 year later. It was unanimously approved by the department and college. The provost rejected it because this former student went to the provost with the professor's original paper, student's data, the still unsubmitted manuscript the student had written up, everything. The unit had a rule that if you don't get tenure, you have to leave. Professor never could get hired in the States after that and had to go back to his home country in the Middle East. I wish this kind of crap wasn't so common. My older sister got a nasty email from her thesis advisor because she submitted a work for publication that didn't shoehorn in a reference to one of his works. She'd been a professor for years at this point. It's not like she's still depending on him to get her PhD, but he's still playing power games. I'll be honest, I didn't completely understand everything I just read, but it sounds bad. To heck with people doing this kind of crap. Whatever that crap was. Look, it's been a long day. Give me a break. Story 5. My ex-coworker. We work in an office, and this one day she must have just been in a bad mood. We were due to have a staff meeting, and she was supposed to arrange it all, hands out agendas, prepare the conference room, lock up, etc. It was about 10:05, and the meeting was at 10. My boss, who was also in a bad mood, came down to reception and asked what the heck was going on. She just flipped out on him. She threw a bunch of paperwork at him and just started shouting about how she's fed up of him and is quitting. She then storms out of the office. My boss just stood there, then turned around and went back to his office. The rest of the staff made her way back to the conference room for this meeting, and as we were sat there, it was really intense and awkward and deathly silent. We were all just looking at our boss, waiting for him to react. Surprisingly, he stayed super calm. Next thing we know, we hear someone unlock the front door and come in. We assume it was this lady. Then we start to hear furious typing. I mean, she must have been slamming her fingers on the keyboard because we could all hear it from upstairs. So we all just sat there listening to this noise, still deathly silent. Eventually it stopped, and this lady storms up the stairs and throws her quitting notice at my boss and leaves again. My boss just looks at it calmly, then finally addresses the rest of us and just said that he will not tolerate being spoken to the way she spoke to him, and that was pretty much it. We carried on the day as normal. Still makes me laugh to think about it. That was a good day. Dang, Mr. Boss handled that like a champ. Story 6. First job working as a host at a local restaurant. Our short, stocky chef was being particularly pestered by our 15-year-old dishwasher boy. Now, this dishwasher boy was annoying on any given day. Non-stop talking, tons of gossiping, whining, and bragging pretty much from the start to end of his shifts. I'm standing at the host station at the tail end of the evening rush when out of nowhere I hear our chef yell, through the walls of the kitchen mind you, "That's it, you little frick!" followed by the high-pitched wail of the dishwasher boy. I only have time to jerk my head toward the racket when the dishwasher boy comes sprinting out of the kitchen, still screaming, past me, past customers, and out the door of the restaurant. Seriously, him shrieking as he ran by was the only time I've had the chance to experience the Doppler effect without a vehicle passing by. Seconds later, the chef bursts out of the kitchen and follows him out of the restaurant, hot on his heels. What incited the altercation was that the dishwasher boy was being his usual aggravating self, and chef, having enough of his crap, told him to knock it off. Dishwasher boy then decides the appropriate thing to do would be to overhand throw a spoiled spoon at the chef while he was working at his station. Spoon caught him square in the face, and that was that. Now, every customer in the restaurant and I are staring in awe into the parking lot as chef closes the distance on Dishwasher Boy. Dishwasher Boy appears to turn and say something to chef in frantic defense for himself. Whatever he is trying to say is cut short as chef grabs his torso with both hands, literally hoists him above his head, takes 2 large steps toward the open steel dumpster, and hurls the dishwasher boy right into it. Chef walks back in and gets back to work without saying a word. Dishwasher boy climbs out and comes back in crying and gets back to work. Customer asks me what just happened. Received a lot of customer complaints that night. Folks, you don't mess with a chef. Chefs tend to be some of the most passionate, tenacious, frightening people on the planet. They are powerful, mad beings trapped in mortal bodies, but push them and you shall see the fires within. Story 7. Best I've seen was my 7th grade math teacher. There was a girl who always talked in class. She got moved to the front at some point and she was laughing and giggling as always. After being told to be quiet about 8 times, the teacher is standing in front and center in front of her, back to her and writing an example on the board. Girl has one of those plastic pencil boxes all the girls used to decorate sitting on the front corner of her desk. The teacher just cracked. In one smooth motion, he spins around, yells, "Shut up," and smacked the box as hard as he can, and it goes flying 15 feet across the room, smashes into the wall, pencils freaking everywhere. He swiftly walks to the door, slams it shut, and we could hear pounding on the wall. One brave kid peeks out the window. Dude was banging his head against the wall. About 2 minutes later, he walks back in. Crickets. Not a noise in the classroom. He begins walking around, picking up every single pen and pencil, puts them all in the box, places it gently on her desk, and then just continues the example like nothing ever happened. It was exquisite. If that doesn't describe 7th grade in a nutshell. This is why I changed my major in college away from English education, because I would be that teacher. I wouldn't be able to handle that kind of crap. Then again, my favorite English teacher once lost his temper with a student who kept sleeping in class, walked over, grabbed his desk, and pushed it with the student into the hall and slammed the door closed. Story 8. There have been many meltdowns where I work between the same 2 people. They're father and son and don't see eye to eye. The son is the president of the company, but the father and mother own majority stock. The son is an alcoholic with a violent temper, though he's okay when he isn't drunk, and the father is 84 and suffers from Alzheimer's, but is still somewhat there. They get into shouting matches over family drama at work. People have ended up being arrested and fired multiple times due to unrelated reasons, but most of the time it just adds fuel to the fire because someone within the family is the one who's being arrested or fired. I watched the son punch holes in the wall and storm out of the building, keys in hand, and speed off down the road. The father goes back to what he's forgotten he's done already. On average, this happens once or twice a week. Sounds like Orange County choppers. Story 9. This Irish bloke I used to work with, say Sean, was on a works meal out at a China buffet place and was fairly drunk. Someone made a slight crack at him, not even sure what it was, but he claimed it was to do with him being Irish, some sort of pee take. He left it for about 5 minutes, but then just suddenly interrupted him talking to others, saying, "You dirty frickin' C." The guy looks bemused and he just repeats, "You're a dirty frickin' C, aren't you?" Getting more and more simmering with rage, pointing at his chest. The guy is basically like, "What the F?" And then, all of a sudden, he throws the wildest drunken haymaker, knocking the guy right into a table full of Chinese food, which collapses, making a pretty impressive noise and mess. The guy's on the floor, freaking covered in shiny sauce, and Sean picks up a pint glass and just tips it all over him. He finally seems to calm down and then just shrugs as if to say, "What can you do?" Says, "Well, he is a dirty frickin' C, that fella," and then strolls out casually, as you do. Good Goodness gracious, I hope they were okay. Huh? Oh no, not the person, the food. I really hope no dumplings were harmed. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. Story 10. I studied on a master's degree in finance, which was known for being extremely high pressure and stressful, and both had my own non-entertaining breakdown as well as saw others. I'd seen things like a girl break down in tears during a lecture because of the sheer number of assignments we already had when another got assigned, a guy breaks his pen and just leave the lecture, and several screaming fights among students apparently over group projects. The best was actually pretty calm, though. We had some guy get invited in to talk about some financial security. I forget the name and have totally left finance with no intentions to return, which effectively allowed you to profit if another person defaulted on their mortgage. About 10 minutes into the talk, this one student who everyone respected basically stood up and spent about 5 minutes completely talking this guy and his career into the ground. The guy kept looking around desperately and looked sheepish as crap, and after that continued with his talk with the most awkward atmosphere with obvious disrespect just emanating from the students. He completely lost any authority in that room. Every question he got after was basically a snide, and people were openly laughing and booing at him. I think it was in part the unethical nature of the security peeing off a bunch of students who grew up with a recession, as well as him becoming the focus of everyone's collective stress. Story 11. First, this involves the new 5-pound notes. For those who don't know, they're polymer notes, and if you fold them up, they tend to stay folded. It's important for the story. I served a customer, a friendly old man with white hair, who paid with a folded 5 pounds. I put it in the till. A few minutes later, my boss was in the till and saw the folded note. He decided that the folds meant it had been rolled up into a tube to snort coke with. He was absolutely adamant. I said, "No, I just took that note from an old man." He started yelling, rolling the note up in his fingers to make a tube, shouting at me, "Look, it rolls up like this. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Don't tell me I'm wrong." He kept shouting at me, basically waiting for me to apologize and back down, say I was wrong. But I wasn't, so I didn't. He wound up storming off, throwing things and slamming things. He's freaking insane, and I should have complained, but there would be no point. Everyone knows what he's like, and no one cares. No joke, it sounds like if anyone was doing coke that day, it was probably your boss. That is the kind of wild reaction I would expect from someone high on the stuff. Story 12. I wasn't there to see it, but my coworkers have talked about the cabinet incident. Last year was the first year of teaching, and I was working in a low-income inner-city school. People kept saying to me, "There's no way you could possibly be worse than the last girl we had." When I asked what they meant, I was told that a few years prior, the principal had hired a first-year teacher. Apparently one day she got so overwhelmed and upset by the behavior of her class that she chucked a ream of paper out the window and then ran into the back room, shut herself in a big cabinet, and cried. Her class was unsupervised for a while. Apparently none of the kids had told anyone what happened, and when the principal found her, she was curled up on the floor of the cabinet, rocking back and forth and sobbing. Clearly, she was fired soon after that. I didn't stay at that school longer than a year because the principal was the equivalent of Satan, but when I left, she said to me, "Despite all the crap you were put through this year from your kids, you're the first teacher I can remember who I never saw cry at school." I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose. Story 13. I worked at Taco Bell while in high school. One of my coworkers was this guy who was really friendly but also really strange. He was obsessed with being a straight-edge kid and drew the XX on his hands and the whole 9 yards. He had a high-pitched but pleasant voice and spoke in an overly polite manner. Anyway, he had put in his 2 weeks, and on his last day, he was working the front counter register. This lady walks up to order, and he just stares at her. After a few seconds, she says, "Can you take my order?" In this very calm and polite voice, he says, "Oh, I am sorry, ma'am, but I cannot." There was another awkward pause, and she says, well, why not?" He responds with, "Because I am a dinosaur!" He immediately starts growling and roaring at her, and he walked back and forth behind the counter like a T-Rex. He did this until the GM, who was back making food, realized what was going on. On her way up to the counter, he calmly clocked out and left. The GM had to apologize over and over again to the poor woman trying to order. That kid was a Taco Bell legend for several years. If I were that woman, I would have been delighted. Absolutely, positively delighted. I would have just started doing dinosaur stuff with him. Because when someone does that, everybody needs to get up, get off the floor, and everybody do the dinosaur. Story 14. When I was in college, I worked in an animal hospital. One week, the boss/owner was on vacation and several coworkers joked about having a liquid lunch together one day. One girl thought it was such a good idea that she brought a bottle of vodka back to work from her break. She tried to get us all to drink together while on the clock, but no one else participated. So she was butthurt and drank herself into oblivion. She made an absolute fool of herself. During all this, she hid one person's wallet, asked me on a date, cursed two people out, spun herself around in circles on the floor like a drunk breakdancer, and puked all over the only employee bathroom and passed out. The office manager helped her to the couch to sleep it off. As most folks were leaving for the day, she woke up and snuck out to her car and flew out of the parking lot, almost hitting a coworker. She floored it down the road and eventually ran over a large curb, which messed her small car up, and she left it and walked to a friend's house. Yeah, she got canned the second the boss got back and even acted surprised about it. Go figure. Story 15. When I was an intern, we had a high-priority project come through that my mentor was working on. Really fast turnaround with many late nights, crappy coffee, and good beer. Anyway, it was towards the end of the project, and I was finishing bringing up on the board at my bench when I heard him muttering quietly to himself. I look up to see if he needed me and watched him absolutely pound a computer monitor with his fist, then grab it, smash it down on the floor before stomping on the screen. "There's no goddamn DRC error, you freaking crap!" He calmed down after a bit, got a beer, then requested a new monitor. That's when I learned that no matter how mad you are, screaming at Altium will not make your sleep deprivation better. Story 16. Guy who's hard of hearing had to blast the radio. Another guy gets sick of complaining to a dongles manager who does nothing. So he silently rips it off the cubicle and smashes it on the floor, which is not carpet, and hard. Really, really freaking hard. Like the dang thing had killed his grandmother. With a look of silent but unfathomable rage on his face like Hugh Jackman coming out of the water or whatever in that Wolverine origin movie. It explodes. All the guts, capacitors, coils, resistors, transistors, circuit board, etc. go flying. And then, as people are gasping and screaming, he just sighs, satisfied like he's busted a huge nut, and leaves. I pretended to be horrified, but I was so happy inside. I'm imagining a clueless, almost deaf guy shedding a single tear after seeing his radio smashed. Never heard anyone complain before and thought life was peachy until Harry Hole Patrol's coworker went apocarp. Do you mean ape crap? Also, if you're hard of hearing, bone conduction headphones. Way easier to hear, they don't cover your ears so people can talk to you. Super comfortable. Story 17. I'm in radio. I'm in radio, and one of the group of stations I worked at had an oldie station, a rock station, and a pop station in the same building. We had an announcer who was really eager and wanted to learn and work and was really a great guy. But the big bosses were total jerks to him and were stuck in their old ways of doing things. They treated the announcer, we'll call him Howard, really poorly, and Howard used to come in and vent about it. He ended up getting hired at another station, but before he left, he went into the music libraries and replaced all the Led Zeppelin songs on the rock station with a gospel song from the oldie station called Trumpets of Jesus. For an entire weekend, anytime Led Zeppelin was supposed to play, Trumpets of Jesus played instead. Howard has since gone on to become program director and has won all kinds of leadership awards. Total legend. That was my best Casey Kasem. Well, my best on-the-spot, low-effort Casey Kasem. And if you didn't like that, you're just lucky I didn't choose to go Ira Glass on ya. Sorry, but if I'm reading a story from someone in radio, they're getting the treatment. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 18. I had a coworker freak out on a customer at Walmart. I used to be a cashier and people used to tend to treat us like crap. Anyway, the lady got mad because she couldn't price match some Doritos because it was the wrong size or something. Anyway, it escalates, we can't find the camp, and a few minutes later they are screaming at each other. The cashier's parting words were, "I'm not freaking price matching your Doritos. You don't even need those Doritos with your fat butt." Needless to say, that was her last day. Had a customer try to price match great value chips for some godforsaken reason. You can't price match Walmart at Walmart. Story 19. Guy got fired at my work for ordering high-cost items and saying they were for clients. They were purchased using state funds and he would just take the items home. Well, he memorized the phone number receptionists use to page people. It's an actual phone number so anyone is able to call it and go through the speakers. So this guy called it and basically said all of these obscenities about people. It was like that scene in The Office where Michael roasts people for making fun of him, but this guy was very naughty. It was kind of funny though. The best part was nobody could do anything about it because he was calling from an outside line and wasn't even in the office. Story 20. My 8th grade teacher got mad at a kid for taking too long sharpening a pencil because the sharpener was broke. She storms over, grabs the pencil, and starts sharpening, but she still can't get it to work. So she huffs over to the student pencil drawer, rips it open, and yanks the drawer so hard it comes flying out. Inside, a pencil sharpener cracked, so a classmate and I tried to clean it up. Then she yelled at us and told us to sit down. Mrs. Crazy then assigns the class a 4-paragraph essay instead of a Socratic seminar, because we couldn't handle mature topics, which is how she interpreted a few nervous laughs. The period after, she threw a chair at a student. This is the teacher that has broken down in class several times before and has a tendency to throw writing utensils and smartboard markers. I certainly don't think teachers should be throwing markers and crap like that. Not okay. But also I can understand because I've seen what classrooms can be like. Of course, that is why I chose not to be a teacher. Story 21. I worked in IT and one guy who was one of the most chilled guys I knew was responsible for the deployment, updates, and maintenance of a specific product that generated high revenue. One afternoon, I was sitting at my desk and just heard a big crash and saw one of his 3 monitors on the floor. He stood up, shoved the next monitor over the divider onto the next section's desk, then swiped the 3rd monitor off the other side, picked up his keyboard, and smashed it as hard as he could, kicked his chair away, and slowly and calmly walked out of the department without saying a word. He came back the next day as if nothing happened. Everyone knew the pressure he was under and was very good at his job, so nobody said a thing. Story 22. Just about a month ago now, 2 of the kitchen guys at the restaurant that I bartend at got in an incredibly heated argument over eating butt. One was very for tongue-punching the old fart box, and the other was very, very against it. Every time I went back to grab food, they were both getting angrier and angrier. It got to the point of them screaming at each other and pans being thrown before finally they seemed to calm down. About 20 minutes later, I go to check on food and only the dishwasher was in the kitchen and no food was even being cooked and a stream of orders were still coming out of the printer. Apparently, the argument started back up, and to solve it once and for all, they went to the parking lot and beat the living crap out of each other. They came back in bruised and quite bloodied and tried to go back to cooking food like nothing happened. 5 minutes later, the owner stormed in with 2 guys that weren't working to cover the rest of the shift and fired both of them as they tried to defend their arguments over eating butt to the owner while the entire staff tried to stifle our laughter. I was hoping they went back to settle it by trying out both ways on each other. First off, commenter, how dare you steal what I was going to say? Second, I warned you all about chefs. This is how they live their lives, and frankly, I love it. Story 23. My PE teacher in the 9th grade got fired for this crap. She tells us to walk laps around the school for cardio day. Some kids decide to run and manage to finish 3 laps by the time the rest of us finished like 2. When we finish our 2nd lap, we see the runners sitting and the teacher just scream, "Get your goddamn puny butts over here!" She proceeds to push the whole class onto the track in 97-degree weather and make us sprint a mile and says that anybody who gets below 7:30 has to run it again. It was a 90-minute period. Everybody finishes, and she sits us down and calls us a multitude of bad words and tells us that we should have finished 3 laps like they did instead of only 2. even though she told us to walk, not run, and they were running. The whole time, we noticed that a girl isn't here anymore. We later found out that she had to be taken in an ambulance because she has asthma and our B, a teacher, denied her of her inhaler. So she fainted and was taken to the nurse's office immediately. And that's how you get a teacher with tenure fired. Story 24. Actually, it was the quietest, most calm meltdown, but it screamed of anger and frustration. So I used to work in a bank's call center. A colleague of mine came in the morning. He came in late and didn't even have his coffee and logged in. The first caller was a rude butthole who started screaming obscenities so early in the morning. My colleague, without saying a word, hung up the phone while the customer was still talking, logged off, and put his headset on the table. He walked calmly and got a pen and paper, wrote his resignation, and handed it over to his supervisor alongside his access card. He walked out the call center and never came back. All of this without saying a single word. It was the embodiment of the phrase, action speaks louder than words. I'm happy for him. Story 25. This happened only a couple of days ago at my work. I didn't see it, but everyone's been talking about it. Apparently, girl A came up behind girl B and slapped her on the hard hat and said, "Learn how to do your frickin' job." And girl B just frickin' lost her crap and went full off on girl A. Chokehold, face punches, regular choking. Girl A tried defending herself with various building parts as weapons. Both are now fired, but I don't really blame girl B. Girl A is a frickin' annoying B and has been pushing everyone's nerves since she started, and I wouldn't want someone like that walking around treating coworkers that way. Someone was bound to take her down a peg eventually. Story 26. In high school, I worked at a grocery store, and this kid was all peed off at another bagger and swearing in front of the customers. He said he was hoping he'd get fired. I told him he should quit before he gets fired so that it would look better on his resume in the future. A few minutes later, I realized he was missing, then suddenly he comes around the corner from the manager's office, no longer in uniform. He threw his uniform in the trash in front of the manager, then he looked at me and said loudly, "I took your advice." Then proceeded to walk across the front end, pointing to each associate, saying, "Frick you" to each of them, and walked out. Everyone was staring at me after, and I said, "I did not tell him to do that." I mean, you didn't, but maybe you should have. Maybe we should all do that. Come on, everyone, let's walk out. I mean, you can. I'm at home in my office, but I support you. Story 27. I'm a bagger at my local grocery store, first job, and we had just hired a new guy about 2 weeks earlier. Anyway, this guy gets his 15-minute break and comes back on time as normal. Only one problem. He is now high out of his mind. Spends about 30 minutes unbagging groceries before management notices and pulls him aside to talk to him about it. Also note, this guy hasn't spoken anything but gibberish for this time, but he freaks out, starts yelling in his gibberish, and throwing cans all around. Story 28. Rubber bands! They're everywhere! 1, 2, 3! Apparently, someone in my office was putting rubber bands all over the place, like around things where it shouldn't be. It annoyed this one girl, and she started accusing people on who did it. Ended up walking through the area the rubber bands were in, yelling about how they were everywhere. Got a work email about how we shouldn't be using work supplies on things other than what they were meant for. Too long didn't read, we had a rubber bandit. Story 29. This guy in a restaurant kitchen got in a fist fight with a younger guy, punched him in the face, backed up, started shaking his face and doing the Scooby-Doo voice. He was nuts. I broke it up and took the other guy out of the kitchen to separate them and came back 10 minutes later and the crazy guy had perfectly cleaned his area, like freaking spotless, and clocked out early and never returned. Never seen or heard from him. Never picked up his last paycheck. Weirdest crap I've ever seen. When you say Scooby-Doo voice, I just imagine him giving a quick jab and saying, "Ruh-roh, Reggie," while in a boxing stance. "Ree, I'm gonna wreck your writ." Story 30. New hire in her first week rubs coworkers the wrong way, acting as though she's the hottest thing to hit our restaurant since food itself. When told her schedule for the next day, she argued with the manager about her availability. Threats of litigation start coming out of nowhere. She approaches 2 police officers who are trying to enjoy their meal completely in tears, breaking down and begging them to arrest our manager for firing her unjustly. They helped escort her out of the building. Story 31. This particular staffer had been on the edge regarding her being employed for about a year. The office manager finally decided to let her go after the 5th time she brought all 5 kids, under 10 all, to work and they destroyed our Keurig. It is on film. The eldest picked it up and slammed it on the floor repeatedly. Her ranting featured extremely loud swearing, calling damnation on the manager, and an itemized list of why we could all go to heck. Story 32. I was in court, lawyer, and we were arguing a motion and requesting sanctions against plaintiff's attorney. The judge starts talking and dressing down the plaintiff's attorney, who, now offended, decided it would be a great idea to interrupt the judge, insult the judge, and flat out told him, "You were too stupid to make it in private practice and you do not know what the frick you are doing." She has been licensed for all of 3 years. Story 33. We had this girl at work and she liked to wear pants that showed a significant portion of her butt. Like, if her butt crack was the Gulf Coast of the USA with Key West being her butthole, we were probably at Tallahassee. Someone complained to her manager. He didn't believe us, so we had him sit in a meeting behind her and was completely horrified. He had a conversation with her about proper workplace clothing. Well, she never got the message, and she got a phone call from HR giving a formal warning. She flips out, storms into a meeting, calls her boss a freaking pervert, then proceeds to yell, "If you want to see my butt, then see this," then moons the room and storms off in a blaze of glory. No, we're complaining specifically because we don't want to see your butt. I'm all for folks wearing what they want, but I do have to respect a workplace not wanting a butt on display. Now I just need to find a map so I can more fully appreciate that first joke. Story 34. I went to a private high school. The teacher having 12 to 14-hour days plus their grading wasn't all that weird. One of my teachers ended up completely snapping one day in the middle of the school year. He went on a full-on rant about one of his classes because they wouldn't stop talking. He was so angry the entire class of about 30 students was being yelled at full volume for 45 minutes of their class time because of this, and left them all in complete shock. For the first 20 minutes of my class period, he sat there quietly without addressing the class. I've never seen a group of 20 teenagers so silent in my life, and I'm sure I'll never see it again. Story 35. I worked in fast food for years, and while it might not be the most intense thing, this kid who worked 60-plus hours a week at 17 came into work one day with a completely shaved head because it was more efficient to maintain and it helped him work more often. I've never seen someone so young be so dead inside and with that shiny of a head. Story 36. A guy I delivered pizza with had his parking spot taken by a guy he hated. He pulled out a giant monkey wrench out of his trunk and smoked him in the back of the head with it. Knocked him out. Yeah, he got arrested. And fired. Well, that escalated quickly. Story 37. Not too legendary, but she was screaming and throwing crap because she got caught smoking in the parking lot after causing drama non-stop the past few months. Her extremely sunburnt, overweight, shirtless father burst into the store threatening management if they don't give her job back. Yeah, I'm sure she would be happy to be back at work after having her father make an appearance like that. I'm sure that is a reputation she wants to live with. Go sit down, Dad. You're embarrassing everyone. Story 38. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese as a teenager, and one guy found out he was being fired. He responded to this news by naturally slitting his wrists and wiping blood on all the walls in the kitchen. I was coming in as it was ending, but we had to call the police and everything. Story 38. My boss was pretty tightly wrapped. One day I came into the restroom, and there she was in a stall smearing her poop on the floor. I recognized her rings, and muttering. When she was finished, she cleaned up the worst of it off the floor, somehow got dressed with her icky hands, got washed, and went back to work. Story 40. Writing financial software in the 80s. The systems analyst sitting at her desk near me suddenly burst into tears and wailed, "It's all so pointless. Money doesn't mean anything." Uh-oh. We've got another one who's seeing through the illusion. I need a team here immediately before the awareness spreads. Agent 3 out. Story 41. 9th grade, my English teacher had to break down in front of the class, kept silent but started crying whilst writing on the overhead projector her complaints about the disrespectful kids in her class. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.